So it is recording.
And it's 2 o'clock here in the east of Europe. The last technical question, I understand that those of us who are not speaking shall be muted, right?
Recording. We are starting this second event of our Urban Thinkers campuses. It's a pleasure to host this event on behalf of the Global Planning Education Associations Network. In fact, when we submitted our proposal to the World Urban Campaign, it was the opportunity to raise the topic of housing affordability. And this event, that is a twofold event, started 2 days ago, in which there was a more regional perspective on this topic. So we had representatives of some of the 11 planning schools associations worldwide, giving their feedback on the topic. And for this second event, this roundtable, we had the idea of bringing together guests from academia that have different perspectives and playing different roles around the topic of housing affordability. So it's on behalf of GPEAN, it's a pleasure to have you here. And without further delay, I will pass the word to Bruce. He's going to moderate the session. And I wish you all a good session and a fruitful discussion. Thank you. Bruce.
Thank you, Paulo. Bruce Stiftel in Atlanta in the US. It's a pleasure to be with you today for this second session focused on planners in the center of the housing crisis. In the first session on Wednesday, we learned that although the contexts differ and the responses differ, that globally in almost every country, there are considerable difficulties surrounding housing, both supply and allocation. We heard that in many countries, housing prices have increased much more than inflation and general prices, but especially much more than salaries. We learned that homelessness and overcrowding are widespread, and that in many countries, planners are not infrequently seen as part of the problem related to the housing market. Today, we're going to look at solutions. We have a panel of academics who have either studied or worked on implementation of housing solutions. They're going to share some of these solutions from various parts of the world. The panel consists of Eva Alvarez from ETSA Madrid, who is the head of urbanism and the planning department at her university. Fernanda Rodrigues from the University of Aveiro in Portugal, who is the immediate past Secretary of State of Housing of the Portuguese national government. Izabela Mironowicz of Poland sits on the scientific council of the Leibniz Institute in Dresden and advises the Slovak Accreditation Commission. Juan Demerutis at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico is the Director of Arts, Architecture, and Design Center at the University of Guadalajara. And Eugenie Birch at the University of Pennsylvania in the US is co-director of the Secretariat of the SDSN Global Commission on Urban SDG Finance, which recently released the report, The Green Cities Guarantee Fund, Unlocking Access to Urban Climate Finance. So 5 panelists from 5 countries. We're going to begin with Eva Alvarez from Spain. Eva.
Okay, I'm going to show the presentation. It's okay.
We see your slide. We see your slide.
Okay, but I can. One moment. I can see my. Oh, sorry. I think it's not in. Now it's okay?
Yes.
And now we see your slide, yes.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this roundtable. As we know, and as you see, land and housing, far from being recognized as rights for all, has been consolidated as a change good, only for those who can pay for them. The exclusion of the rights to housing and to the city has become a global, structural, and political issue. In this context, the self-production or co-production of space, commonly referred as informality, becomes, for an increasingly large majority, the only way to realize these rights, even if it is in a very precarious way. The exclusion of this right is an issue that affects many people around the world. In Spain, for example, more than 1 million of families have been evicted from their homes after the crisis of 2008. Since then, the violation of the right to housing has only worsened. With almost no public housing stock in Spain, around the 2%, the price of rental housing has risen by 50% in the last decade, while the price of home ownership has returned to the price crisis values. A reality that particularly affects young people. For these people, it is estimated that the effort to access to a housing can cost between the 60 and 90% of their income, making the access of a housing affordable and possible for most people under 30s. A situation of housing emergency that has given rise to a strong social mobilization and the appearance of social movements such as the Platform of People Affected by Mortgage, and more recently, the Union of Tenants. These social movements have carried out actions such as stopping eviction or the occupation of empty housing. Although of these efforts of co-production of the space and citizen self-organization, far from being recognized by those who should be the guarantors of this right, are systematically criminalized, persecuted, and penalized. The right to a housing and to the city became a struggle in a context of unequal power relationship. And in this context, we ask ourselves about how can adequate, safe, and affordable housing for all be ensured, and what can be engaged of planners. From my experience, we need to start by recognizing that nothing justifies the violation of these rights. In the face of the inability of the state and the market to guarantee them, it is essential to value the knowledge and the capacities of these communities as subjects with full rights, so that on the basis of this positive recognition, we can build a relationship of trust with these communities, which implies taking the time to get to know each other and reject any extractivist relationship, and also be willing to give up the power in order to promote truly equitable structures. For from these plural and reciprocal networks to promote useful actions that truly contribute to make their rights effective, action that help to unite and strengthen the community because they respond to a common problem that affects to the entire community. Actions in which everyone can participate and to feel proud of what we can do together. And from this collaborative experience, generate evidence as census, life stories, contra mapping, etc., which in turn are disseminated, what can contribute on the one hand to make visible the structural causes of the sociospatial injustice, and on the other hand, to promote a discourse of positive recognition and legitimation of all of these knowledge, capacity, actions, etc. All of which, in turn, can contribute to strengthen the community's negotiation capacity and to generate and expand alliance with other actors, and thus can help to force the political agenda and that their demands are finally taken into account. Now we have approved, for example, a new law for housing in Spain. All of these show that reality and authority structures are transformable. Ultimately, what we need is to promote the sociospatial justice. To go far into this issue, there are many references that can be consulted, but I would recommend the most recent publication in planning theory about the promotion of sociospatial and cognitive justice. Thank you. Perhaps I've been very brief in my presentation, but I remain at your disposal for clarification or discuss anything. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva Alvarez. We will next turn to Fernanda Rodrigues from Portugal. Fernanda.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm going to share my screen. 1 minute, please. There it is. Share. And I have to put it in the presentation mode now. It's okay? Yes, it is. Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Paulo, for this invitation to be here with you in this round table and and greetings to all the participants in this round table too. I'm Fernanda Rodrigues. I am from Portugal. I am from the same university of Paulo, the University of Aveiro. And considering the title of this Urban Thinker Campus, Affordable Housing as a Key to Sustainable Development, I would like to start by the concept of sustainability, or better, by referring to the 4 pillars of the sustainability: the social, the economic, the environmental, and the human pillar of sustainability. And thinking of all these pillars, we cannot achieve social sustainability, human sustainability, sustainability development without having house and adequate house for all. I think this is the main aspect of these sustainability development aspects. I also would like to refer to the concept of adequate housing that that include adequate space, adequate privacy, adequate security, adequate light and ventilation, adequate basic infrastructures, and adequate location in relation to employment and essential services, all at a reasonable cost to the beneficiaries, not a financial good, but a social good, as we know. And in spite of housing being a human right since 1948, and in spite of in the Portuguese constitution, it is a constitutional right to have a house. Along all the previous years, we had in Portugal, because I'm going to focus in the reality of Portugal, we have been facing always a shortage of housing and a lack of decent housing for thousands of people. But today we are facing a severe crisis of shortage of housing, and still a shortage of adequate housing for some great part of the population, not a great part, but a part of the population. And before going inside the answers of these questions, I would like to refer some of the causes of this crisis in Portugal. As you know, we faced in 2008 and after a financial crisis, and this financial crisis led in Portugal to the intervention of the International Monetary Fund in 2011. And this intervention was based or had as consequence a Troika Memorandum. And this Troika Memorandum brought us a lot of severe consequences. During this period, for example, an intense crisis affected the construction sector, with hundreds of companies' bankruptcies and the loss of more than 350,000 jobs. And consequently, in the consequence of this crisis in the construction sector, there was registered a decrease of the construction and a decrease of housing, of the construction of housings. With the memorandum, the Troika Memorandum, we had the allowance to speeding up the eviction of the households, and it was to be, if they are to be rehabilitated, refurbished, and combined with this speeding up, speeding up of eviction, also it was put in place the speeding up of administrative or licensing rehabilitation procedures, and all these led to the conversion of many residential houses or buildings to touristic or tourist purposes. And the facilities that were given during this period, both for the eviction of households and also for the rehabilitation of the refurbishment of buildings, were associated with the global tourism intensification, I'm sorry, I didn't change the slide. This tourism intensification, Portugal attract lots of people for tourism purposes and led to the touristification of our cities. And with this, a great increase of short-term rental occurred. At this moment, we had in Portugal, that is a small country with only 10,300,000 inhabitants, we have 120,000 dwellings affected to the short-term rental. And lots of buildings were converted also for hotels, for example. At this moment, we have almost 6,000 of buildings for tourism developments. Also in Portugal, we had another phenomenon. the golden visa scheme that the government facilitate that foreign people came to Portugal and can invest in the buying buildings for housing or for other purposes. And this scheme led to the proliferation of investment funds in housing for property speculation. Another aspect that the government, the previous governments gave after the Troika intervention or during the Troika intervention was to give a good tax regime for non-habitual residents. All these together led to the speculation of the prices, because these people that are coming for Portugal have high incomes and can buy houses with high prices, and all this pressure increase the prices of the houses. Of course, we also observed the migration and immigration intensification, the increase of demographic rates because the immigration and migration flux for Portugal and for other countries in Europe, and the concentration of people in the coastal zones also make pressures to the big cities, especially Lisbon, Porto, and so on. And that is a big problem. We are still in the consequence of the financial crisis. We had in the last years a limited rate of new construction and refurbishment construction. And this low level of construction and refurbishment has not kept pace with demand, especially in urban centers. Various factors are under this problem, including the high level of bureaucracy that we have, for example, for the licensing of the construction and the refurbishments, the high land prices, and the complex zoning laws. And all these slow down the development also of new affordable housing, and this is a big problem. Also, all this together, the excessive tourism, the migrant and migrant flows have exacerbated the housing shortage. And we can't forget that the structure of the families also changed in the last years. Nowadays, we have more and more families, monoparental, single-parent families, and single-person households. So we need more houses. We need a greater number of dwellings. And in Portugal, we have, I think in all the countries, but here we have, as I will show a little bit later, a high rate of vacant dwellings. And these vacant dwellings are not fulfilling their social role of providing housing of affordable prices, but they are waiting opportunities for property speculation, which led to a shortage of housing supply relative to the demand. That are lots of factors that are contributing to this shortage of housing. So now the answers, how we can answer to this problem. I think the governments have to act and controlling and restricting the number of permissions to short-term rental. It is a problem not only in Portugal, but all around Europe and beyond Europe. I know that other cities, for example, in the United States, put in place these restrictions to limit the open more short rental term rental licenses, to stop with the tax benefits for non-habitual residents and to stop with the golden visa scheme, and especially governments cannot let the solution of the housing shortage in the market hands. It is proved that it is not a solution, because we realized that in the last years it was a catastrophe, because we thought that the problem of housing, it was solved, the market will solve everything. But it was a mistake, a big mistake. And we have to invest more and more in public housing and affordable housing to achieve the needs. We have to give incentives to more housing and for more refurbishment, to more renovation, to more reconversion of buildings for housing, and to live. And also, it is essential to give incentives to people, especially the young people, to live in small urban centers, to live even in rural areas. And with this, we can contribute to the national and European territorial and social cohesion. And we must improve the small, to achieve this goal, we must to provide these small urban areas or even the rural areas with good mobility systems, with good digital infrastructure, with good health and education facilities. It is essential. And to give, we also have to give incentives to use the high number of vacant dwellings that exist in our countries. You can realize that we have 2.1% of vacant dwellings in Portugal. It is the same rate of social housing in Lisbon. So in the total, we have 523,000 dwellings free, and almost 50% of these dwellings are in good conditions to be used. So, and in Portugal, the last statistical data says that we need 180,000 houses to answer to the quantitative housing shortage. So we have enough housings. So they are not well distributed or not well used. About the second question, what is the engagement of planners at different planning levels, from policy making to urban design? What can I say? About the policy responsibles, I think we can say that they have to guarantee the continuous investment in affordable public housing. In Portugal, we had a lot of investment in public social housing and affordable housing until 2000, 2003, but after that, nothing has been done. So this investment can't be fragmented. It must be continuous. We have to know that it is a continuous problem, and they have to accompany the changes of the society. All the governments have to have a real radiography of the housing needs to support the planning of the housing investments to be implemented at the European level and at national levels, and according of the needs and the expectations of the population, of the communities. And we have to provide targeted funding to vulnerable areas to prevent social decline and improve living conditions in an integrated perspective, and to stimulate the use of vacant dwellings for housing, to give incentives to the owners to put them in the market, and to transform the public vacant patrimony for housing, and to transform this patrimony that is from the government, from the state, not from the government, from the state, and that can be used and transformed for B houses. At the level of the urban design, I can say that urban designers have to see the urban design as integrated, as continuous, and we have to think not only in the building itself, we have to think in the urban integration, in the urban environment development and integration. And we have to think more and more in researching, in put in practice green solutions to face the challenges that we are facing nowadays and that we will face in the future, that are the consequences of the climate changes. So with the implementation of these green solutions, we will give to people more comfortable, more resilient habitats. And we have to transform the most vulnerable urban areas in attractive ones at social, environmental, and economic level, and consequently at the human level too. And we have to create also natural climate refuges, not only in the big cities, but out of the big urban centers, to mitigate the climate changes consequences and promote the option, the attractiveness for these areas or even for rural areas.
Fernanda, I hope you'll be able to
Yes,
conclude.
yes. Well, two slides, Bruce. It is possible. So we contribute for more accessible and affordable housing for all. We have to combat segregation, providing safe and affordable homes and in the more little areas, contributing for social and territorial cohesion, and contributing to the achievement of sustainable environment, social and human objectives by using empty houses in all the areas. So with this, with the engagement of all, we will implement sustainability as a broad shared vision, a commitment for all. Thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry for my delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernanda Rodrigues. And next we will turn to Izabela Mironowicz in Poland. Izabela.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. While trying to share my presentation, I would like to add that my affiliation is Gdansk University of Technology, Poland. You see my presentation now?
We do.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. As Fernanda already mentioned, we are looking for the answer to two questions, right? One is how can adequate, safe, and affordable housing for all be ensured? And the other, how can planners be involved in this process? And my approach is that we can look to history for inspiration. I borrowed the title of this my short intervention from Roman Krasnarik, who is his recent, truly inspiring book, creatively interprets how practices from the past can help us to create a better future, better from the present. Of course, we build our knowledge of housing on the knowledge and practice of many generations. The choice of the planning traditions you see on the slide is surely not random. From the social housing program of Red Vienna a century ago to the postulates of the Charter of Athens, which stated that public and social interest should prevail over private interest. And the first women urban planners are also important. However, today I want to show what we can learn from the mass housing programs that took place across Europe after the Second World War. Those built by public authorities or massively subsidized by public funds. Consider that the starting conditions, what the starting conditions were at the time. An acute housing shortage, societies exhausted by the brutal war, limited public resources. Does this not seem similar to the situation we see in many places today? Today, of course, we have additionally a deepening triple planetary crisis, as well as social and political crisis, multi-crisis, so to speak. The first thing we shall acknowledge is the efficiency of these programs. In Poland, where I come from, despite the incompetence of the Soviet-dependent government, the post-war housing programs were able to provide more housing than the fully privatized housing market after the transformation of 1989. Of course, I am aware that housing estates, especially large housing estates, are subject to negative narratives. As the research shows, many, if not the majority of these narratives, do not come from residents, but instead they were introduced into public debate by politicians, corporate business, and mainstream media. Space is a resource of the planet. And like any other resource, it is, by its very nature, limited. We can't afford luxury, rather excess, for everyone. This is a false promise of capitalism. But if we share the goods we seek, access to green spaces or to nature more broadly, places to socialize, different forms of education, sport facilities, health centers, leisure, culture, and much more, we can certainly afford them. Private sufficiency, public luxury, as George Monbiot puts it. Very cleverly, I would say. This is exactly what we can learn from these mass housing programs. Do you think perhaps that this private sufficiency and public luxury would have to be unattractive, and that these solutions would not capture the imagination of the people? I do not agree. We have examples of such solutions. Probably many people in the world would love to live in such conditions, with a shared swimming pool on the roof of the building and a beautiful view of the city of Vienna, in modest but functional apartments and generous green spaces around, in the estate owned by the city of Vienna. Is that a good or bad place to live? As we said, space is limited. As planners, we need to find the optimum density for housing that meets social needs. Well, you may ask what optimum means in this context. It means ensuring a minimum standard for all residents while reducing the negative impact on the environment. The post-war estates fit well into such a defined limits. By the way, note that both very low and very high densities are areas of negative environmental impact, and both affect the quality of life of others. And to be clear, density is often also demanded by the neoliberal economy, by developers. I am far from supporting these claims of increasing density for profit. Density is about improving the quality of life, not increasing the bank accounts of developers, landowners, and property speculators. Density provides access to the services we need. This is a lesson learned from the post-war mass housing programs. Well, the urban form is very important. An urban form that encourages sharing and togetherness, a layout from which it is difficult to extract private, because the space is designed for sharing and commoning. A beautiful park or meadow accessible to all requires a certain configuration of space. Good view from window too. These housing estates discourage the use of private cars. They facilitate walking and biking instead. Do you think it's time to revise the criticism of the legacy of the post-war mass housing programs? They are of size of small town and have all the necessary facilities. There are nurseries, schools, libraries, youth and senior clubs, sport facilities, medical centers. There are shops and cafes. Children walk to school without having to cross the street. No excess, but nothing really missing. Aren't they good examples of what we can actually call good quality of life? Do we really need to keep looking for a 15-minute city model? In many cities, we also see a specific form of ownership of large housing estates. For example, non-profit housing associations. And more importantly, very often, the land is not privatized. This lesson shall be learned too. It is important to note that common areas are usually green. The role of these estates in greening the city cannot be underestimated. They are also important in terms of ventilation and preventing urban heat islands. Their retention potential should be also recognized. In other words, they can be crucial in helping to create high-quality urban ecological systems. These estates can also help reduce consumption in a way that does not compromise the quality of life, but the opposite. Perhaps it's better to use a shared laundry room than to have a washing machine in your own bathroom. These shared washing machines will be of better quality and better suited to our needs, and we will have more space in the bathroom. What about the children not having those ridiculous hundreds of individual toys, but sharing one big playroom with toys in the apartment block? How often you use the electric drill you have at home? How many times you need a screwdriver? Or maybe we should have a shared toolbox instead of buying thousands of things we rarely use. What about co-working spaces in apartment buildings or in neighborhoods? These practices can also build good, convivial relations with neighbors. The design of neighborhoods should also facilitate social interaction through informal contacts. This is important from a community building perspective. This is a prerequisite for a true democracy. Community building can manifest itself in a variety of practices that are largely determined by the organization of space. Urban gardening, for example, or efficient energy production, joint sport practices, local cultural events, or exercising democratic rights. There is much more we can learn as planners from this estate. I think that the intense critique between the neoliberal narrative stems from the fact that these estates were not designed for the individual consumer, but instead for the responsible and emphatic member of the local community, one who does not overuse the earth resources, someone who has a good relationship with their neighbors and does not compete with them, a responsible steward of the environment. These estates fit well with the new planning paradigm proposed by Markus Hedorfer, president of the ECTP, planning for nature with human needs in mind, not the opposite. They also fit the post-growth and especially the degrowth postulates, which offer alternative imaginary to what we have now. If you want to learn more about them, I invite you to visit the website of the Post-Growth Cities Coalition, and thank you for your attention.
Izabela, thank you for unbundling housing services for us and getting us to think about the role of housing within the larger community. Next, we're going to turn to Juan Demerutis in Guadalajara, Mexico. Juan.
Yeah, I'm just trying to stop sharing, but it's somehow not working very well. I don't know what to do. Oh yes, probably I need to finish it off now. Oh, I just can't make it. Give me a second.
If you continue passing the slide.
No,
Okay.
that's fine. Typically, people cannot begin, and I couldn't stop.
And we see your slide.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, I will start thanking the organizers for this invitation. It's really nice to be here with all these wonderful and brilliant colleagues, planners from all over the world. So thank you very much for that. I'm Juan Demerutis. I'm a professor at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico, and I would like to present these situations that we are living here in my country, and it's the underutilization of urban assets, and specifically the housing stock in Mexico. So I will start by saying that affordable housing has never been of interest to real estate developers unless they count on the assistance of the state. The market caters only to the needs of those groups in society with resources to afford a product that generates profit for developers. For this reason, the participation of the state is fundamental in generating affordable housing for all. We need a state that promotes affordable housing on urban land, guaranteeing the right to the city. In countries such as mine, Mexico, public policy for affordable housing has been intermittent. Sometimes it supports the development and construction of new housing developments. However, the housing policy implemented in the first 2 decades of the 21st century has proven to have a negative impact on cities. What you see in the slide is some of what it's going on in most of the Mexican cities currently or in the last 20 years. The main reason is that housing construction has been carried out in remote sites that have neither the infrastructure nor the necessary facilities to meet the needs for the new inhabitants. These isolated suburbs include minimal housing on 60 square meters plots, sometimes in dwellings as small as 45 square meter, where a household is supposed to live. From 2000 to 2018, millions of homes with these characteristics and locations away from the central city were produced. More than 20 years have passed, and these areas have managed to consolidate with the management of their inhabitants through citizens who demand from the state the infrastructure and facilities their homes did not initially have. But it has taken 20 years to achieve. In the Mexican case, this has caused a significant problem of vacant housing, something similar to what I've heard in Portugal. But we are at the rate of 14% for 2 decades of vacant housing. And since this is happening, it's about 6.1 million of vacant housing. So again, in the discussion of last Wednesday, the crises are different in every region, no? The size of the crisis is pretty different in every region. On the one hand, because of this, on the one hand, the periphery allocates housing units without facilities and sufficient infrastructure, as well as no jobs. Inhabitants who have acquired credits directly from the federal government have decided to leave their homes to return to dwelling district closer to their workplaces. This is an image from Guadalajara, and you can see in red the vacancy of dwellings, and it's mostly in central and peripheral areas, as you can see. And also we have experienced a fast growth and expansion of the city. However, it is essential to note that vacant units have also been registered in the center, in downtowns. Since there is an ample supply in the periphery, many of the new households have decided to experience life in the distant peripheries, mainly because that is also where the housing within their economic reach is located. Simultaneously, this has provoked the departure of the inhabitants of the city centers, these well-consolidated areas with infrastructure and facilities that are now performing at a very low percentage of their potential. And at the same time, these are also the areas offering most of the jobs available in metropolitan areas. This is a true phenomenon of underutilization of resources, both the housing stock, but also the infrastructure and facilities installed. I'd like to talk also about rental housing. Affordable rental housing is another format that has been very little explored in Mexico. It appeared only in President Sheinbaum's recent housing policy proposal after 20-30 years. However, the proposal includes a 10-year rent payment model, which can be accumulated to make the final housing payment. Consequently, after 10 years, their owners could sell these housing units in the formal market, most likely causing displacement among the original occupants. If they were economically successful during this period, they could or they would be able to move to a better location. But if not, they are likely to go to distant locations where low land values can be found. This brings us to the other condition that impedes affordable housing development: high land values. This is probably the main problem in redeveloping the consolidated city in the face of urban sprawl and the high value of land. It is also the land where the primary error or mistake of public policy for the financing of affordable housing lies, as it has been oriented in the last 24 years towards the funding of individuals who can choose where to live depending on the money they are able to get, and not towards the financing of central locations of the city where there is consolidated land close to the job places offered, which has caused an excessive expansion of the metropolis. In the Mexican case, planning for the development of affordable housing has had its primary strategy. As a primary strategy, the financing from the federal government, and in a very few cases at the subnational level. At the same time, the municipality has lagged in the promotion of affordable housing. Since they do not have enough resources, it's very little what they can do in terms of affordable housing. But zoning, the municipality has focused on zoning, a relatively static physical planning with a focus on the planner's professional knowledge hired by the local government, a process in which the citizens participate very little. Here, the planners should have a more active role in connecting and adding the experience and knowledge of the final users of dwellings. It is important to note that in Mexico, 6 of every 10 homes, and this is also true in most of the Latin American countries, are self-produced through self-construction and self-management to construct or remodel. So again, urban planners and designers should strengthen the communication, the links with the users. It is also important to note that when the government at any level is not involved in the generation of public policy instruments for affordable housing in developing countries such as Mexico, informality rises, causing self-production to be carried outside from formal processes that avoid the payment of duties and property taxes, thus significantly reducing municipal public finances. Housing developments of 10, 20, or 40,000 homes turned into new towns, which changed the landscape in a very important way, particularly former rural areas immediately surrounding large metropolitan areas. To contribute to best practices in urban development, planners must use technology and data science to generate data-driven narratives, to make the case for likely solutions so that informed decisions about metropolis or urban areas development can be made in conjunction, in collaboration with end users and the state. This is an example of the things that can be done with data. Now the current microdata produced by official institutions in most of Latin American countries that goes even to disaggregation of a block. So some reflections, I will end with some reflections about housing policies. First of all, we need straightforward public policies for affordable housing. State that listens to the housing needs, a rental affordable housing stock, a data-driven public policy for affordable housing. In developing countries, inaction on affordable housing pushes informality. And number two, land values are rising at all times. Financing for places and not for persons is needed. Promoting second or third floor construction for third housing units, at least in Mexican cities, which are all spread out and very horizontal, is something that we should push forward. In Mexico, national levels policies are financing oriented, while some national and local policies are focused on physical planning. So federal funding or in general funding subsidizes persons and not places, something that I believe must change. Subnational level governments are marginally involved in affordable housing development. And finally, local governments focus on zoning ordinance only, and they should have a leading role since they have a more direct contact with citizens in general. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Demerutis. We will have our last speaker of the day. We'll turn to Eugenie Birch in the United States. Jeannie, you are muted.
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you, Paolo, for organizing this, and Bruce for being the moderator, and all the spectacular speakers, because what you've illustrated is the problem that we're trying to address at a global level, which is basically a local problem. And so the question is how we define what affordable housing is and the role of planners within our local context, yet at the same time have global solutions. We are struggling with the idea of sustainability and resilience. We are focusing on housing as a physical element, yet at the same time, we need to be thinking about the social, economic, and political aspects of it, which you so remind us of when you think about and talk about how localities are organizing around the issue of affordable housing. I would suggest that we need to be thinking both about the sustainability issues that we commonly think about, which is the economic, social, and governance issues, and in particular begin to talk in terms of something called climate resilient development, bringing together the two big global issues that are of great interest to world reformers and all of us active as planners, which is housing as a right, the affordability of housing, the ability to provide housing, and having cities for all, yet at the same time remembering that we're faced with a global climate change issue as well. And housing also consumes energy, both in its design and its location. And so we need to be bringing these two streams together as we think about that, and many people are doing that around the world right now. As we know, systems vary around the world, and you've illustrated this so beautifully in your talks. Some of us live in federal systems where the government has a different kind of role. Others live in unitary systems where the government has a particular kind of role. And we as planners have to operate within those different kinds of systems. In a federal system, we have much more local authority in most cases in terms of what we can do as planners. In a unitary system, we have less authority with regard to that at the local level, and perhaps more authority at the national and state level, where policies are and funding comes from to the localities. So we need to be thinking about that as we pose our solutions and discuss it. And as I said, every single one of you has done that very beautifully. Then we need to think about how do we actually define affordable housing? In some places, the issue is basically the cost of housing, the burden of carrying housing. In other places, it's simply lack of units, which are related to the cost of housing, but also it's a supply problem. There's another issue too. How much housing should be ownership and how much should be rental? So we need to be thinking about that as well in terms of the goals of what we're trying to do. We've seen basically these wonderful solutions in Portugal and Spain and Mexico, and particularly taken by the idea to revisit the high density housing that we heard from Professor Mironowicz in terms of what that added to us. At the same time, Professor Demerutis showed us the difficulties of sprawl and how we manage that. So this definition of what affordable housing is intertwined with social, economic, and political issues, yet at the same time it's a technical issue. It's a technical issue having to do with design, having to do with law, having to do with finance. And we as planners have to bridge those two areas as we pose solutions. And then we need to think about housing affordability in different kinds of systems with regard to level of development and who the housing's being planned for and who we're targeting in this whole thing. Because it, again, varies very dramatically from country to country, from city to city. If we're looking at the global south, we understand that there are issues of cost, there's issues of land, there's issues of ownership, there's issues of around land, just having enough land for the housing in the proper places. And we need to be thinking about the design. Many of you brought up the issue of informality, where in many cities, 30 to 40% of the housing units are informal housing units. The question is, what's the distinction between slum housing and informal housing in these particular instances? Slum housing, of course, as defined by UN Habitat, is the lack of basic services, the lack of tenure, the lack of durability, and so forth. Informal housing, again, a slight distinction, is basically related to the tenure issues, less on the material issues that are associated with slum housing. So when we talk about the global south, we need to be thinking about exactly what this is in terms of the level of development in those informal areas. If you go to Bogota, for example, you will see lots of what's called consolidated informal housing, which is basically housing that started as informal housing in slums in the 1960s, 70s, and so forth, but today in 2000 is quite solid. It's not made of non-durable materials. It's made of bricks and mortar and multi-floors and so forth. Is very much established in those informal areas, but is lacking some of the basic services that need to be done. So when we talk about planning and providing for better affordable housing in places like that, we're talking about the provision of services in places that are well located and well developed, and thinking about how to apply building codes that are sensitive to climate as well as sensitive to materials in all levels of informal housing. I would bring your attention to the work of Sheila Patel and her movement called Roofs Over Our Heads, in which she is dealing with thinking about what kinds of materials should be used in what I'll call incipient informal housing, the original informal housing. The tin roof, of course, contains the heat. We need to be thinking about how to create materials in the informal housing that are heat resistant and so forth. So there's a technical piece to all of this in the range of housing from informal to formal. I'd like to move a little bit in comparison here to the global north, where obviously materials are not necessarily the issues in terms of the existence of housing already. We've heard, of course, in Portugal, there's plenty of vacant units that just need to be adapted and reused, but there also may be new materials that need to be used. We at Penn have people who are working on cement that basically uses less energy in its production. So if we're thinking about new construction in areas where materials costs are less of a concern than in some places. The use of technology to create the new materials that are climate resilient as well as appropriate for new construction is important. But then we have to reverse that back to the informal housing and how we can make those kinds of materials and designs work for those who have very low income. So again, the housing issue is not one issue around the world. It's a complex local issue, but we need to be thinking about the technical pieces of it as planners, because that's where our skill is. So in the terms of land, as we heard earlier, we need to be thinking about how we restrict land or prepare land. In the global north, land is restricted by zoning. There's lots of discussion, particularly in the United States, about how that might be dealt with, but in a federal system where localities have total power over their land use, it's a little difficult to break that hold that localities have on their land use and then prevention of affordable housing. So it's up to us in terms of planning and the ability to provide inspiration for design to show how land use could be changed with regard to density, which I love the discussion of density that we had earlier and how important it is to understand what density is and what good density is and bad density is. This is part of our role, to be able to be educators and explainers of what density means. And in those particular communities where zoning restrictions are very high, that's a very big barrier to be overcoming, but it can be overcome through lots of work and lots of illustration, and remembering that one of the big skills that we have as planners is our ability to design and to show people the spatial dimensions of what we're talking about, and being able to inspire the visions of what affordable housing can be, both in the global south and the global north, through designs that are climate resilient, but also can take into consideration these new ideas, not so new ideas, but ideas of how to use density, and thinking of planning for affordable housing, not just as planning for the unit, but planning for the community. And that means, as many of you have said, we need to be thinking about transportation, we need to be thinking about services, we need to be thinking about open space, we need to be thinking about the whole unit, not just housing. It's housing plus, as we move in our various respective local places where we have very difficult kinds of, in different ways of addressing this whole thing. That deals with the whole piece of design that we need to be thinking about. There are three areas, as I said. One is land, dealing with land. Second is design and how we design places depending upon what locality we're in. And lastly, finance. That is probably one of the hardest nuts to crack, but that's very, very important. So if we're talking about the global south, where we've got 30%, 40% of people living in informal housing, and often in unitary governments, localities often don't have sources of their own revenue. And we need to find ways to provide decentralization that works for localities. And there's a big discussion about that in the global financial architecture world, where there's, of course, a great movement to push for subnational finance and to get the multilateral development banks to be thinking about how to lend directly to cities, which is part of the work that I've been working on, this SDSN Global Commission on SDG Urban Finance. You have systems that date from, and thank you for reminding us about history, Professor Mironowicz, that date from the post-war period, that were agreed upon decisions of states, of nations, as to how the financial system will work in the provision of funding for communities and for development, and particularly for housing. And that financial system is based on members making decisions and nations taking on the responsibilities of debt. That is reinforced by the system that we have. For example, the the IMF, which annually does debt sustainability studies of individual nations, which means that those nations are rated as their ability to pay back their loans. And when subnational governments come to them and say, let us borrow some money, the finance ministers will often say, wait a minute, that's going to count as part of our debt problem, or how we're ranked. And so part of our issues in dealing with trying to get funding to localities for affordable housing is attacking the international global financial architecture. And that's a huge issue that mayors, that governors, that involves what we call multi-level partnerships. And I would bring your attention to the work of CHAMP. Again, I'm going back and forth between the global and the local level, but you may or may not have heard of CHAMP, which is the Coalition for High Ambition for Multi-Level Partnerships, which came out of the climate work, the COP meetings, which is calling upon better arrangements for what we call subsidiarity. That is, giving the appropriate roles to levels of government so they can do what they need to do best. And that means creating partnerships at national level so that we have the kinds of policies such as Professor Demerutis was talking about at the national level, the need for recognition of housing at the national level, but national level probably shouldn't be building that housing, it should be at the local level. And the question is how we organize not only the local political structures, but the financial structures to make that happen. And that's a huge particular area, and how we can allow localities to have their own revenues, how they can become credit worthy. And that's, again, we're talking about the global South and cities where they're experiencing so much growth, how they can become credit worthy so they can participate in the local financial markets or the international financial markets. One of the strengths of the global North has been their ability to tackle and get funding through various international markets and national markets. I'm talking particularly the bond markets. We've heard a lot of talk about the creation of green bonds, sustainability bonds, housing bonds, and social bonds. Well, no one's going to give debt to places that can't pay their money back. And so one of the issues, of course, is getting the basics right at the local and subnational level so that they can take place and experience ways of raising funding to support the kinds of services, particularly affordable housing, that's needed. And so when we talk about affordable housing then, and what planners can do, there are many, many roles that we can perform at the local level, helping localities get the basics right, which is having accountability in local government, having legal structures and frameworks that provide for certainty when development needs to occur, having the appropriate amount of land available for the kinds of densities that would be important, providing for the services, good planning, all this you know. I don't have to tell you about that. But that's a political problem, and that's how do you get the planner to work with the politicians and the politicians to work with the planners, which means we as planners have a responsibility to show how good planning can make a politician look good. And so that's a big responsibility as far as that goes. So I've gone all over the place here, talking from global to local, but you can see when we talk about housing, it's a local problem, but it has enormous global implications in terms of all the work that needs to be done that each one of you is doing in your own places and in your participation in GPEAN, which is a very strong lobbying group. And we need to be thinking about how to strengthen our local planners so they've got the technical facility to deal with the spatial issues that are so important to providing that housing, yet at the same time need to unite and partner with the various groups around the world that are pushing institutions like the IMF, like the United Nations, like the associated world banks and multilateral development banks to pay attention to the importance of local development and financing that local development in a way that is meaningful, in a way that will provide the affordable housing that is needed for the various groups of population that need that housing. One thing that I didn't mention, and I think you've all, again, certainly recognize this, we need to target that housing. There are, in some cases, there are young couples that can't afford their first house or don't have rental for that. There are the elder people who need different kinds of housing, and we need to find ways to address how we target that housing, how we pay for that housing, where we locate that housing, and how we create cities for all that include affordable housing, but also function with a quality of life that we all are working on. And that means getting involved locally, but more equally important with this group here, getting involved at the global level to push for those reforms that are needed to achieve what we want to achieve.
Thank you, Eugenie Birch, for really reminding us of the global role for this community. I'm taken by how this group of planners have shown us many ways in which the housing crisis is tied to so many other aspects of urban development, tied to land use separation or integration, tied to the provision of services, to transportation mobility, to energy consumption, to climate resilience, to global finance. This is so often the role that planners play, is to knit together the different sectors within the urban development process to try to get better outcomes. And I really think, speakers, you've captured many dimensions of that process very well today. Let's turn to an opportunity to ask each other questions. I'm going to take the chance to throw a first question out, and then we'll ask the rest of you to indicate if you'd like to respond, and then we'll move on to further questions from you. What I haven't heard much about today is the third sector, the role of nonprofits or non-governmental organizations in either providing housing or helping resident groups to upgrade their situations. The third sector is, in my understanding, really a significant player these days, certainly involved in slum upgrading, but also the co-housing movement. I'm hopeful that some of you will want to comment on the way the third sector plays a role in housing provision in the context that you're familiar with, or what you think the third sector should be doing. Jeannie, it looks like you want to respond.
Well, I want you to define the third sector, because to some of that, us, that means community development organizations. To some of that, us, it means basically sources of funding. And I'm thinking from my perspective, and I'm thinking about the financing of these issues, that we have many sources of funding. We have philanthropy, which can leverage experimental activities. We have basically pension funds, which one doesn't necessarily think of as the third sector, but boy, there's a lot of money there, and that can be put to the kinds of issues that we're thinking about, and how we develop a framework where we bring this funding from the sources of funding that might be defined as third sector into, I'll call those major third sector, into the minor third sector, which is the local development corporations. I'm sorry about using those words, but basically there's a structure of third sector organization. We need to think about framing that and how we bring the funds and talent to create the affordable housing.
I'll take that. I mean, my thought was that the conversation has focused on developers and on governments. And I'm hoping to expand the conversation as you've done. I think Fernanda Rodrigues, you I think had your hand up first, and then Eva Alvarez after that.
No, Eva put the hand first in, I think, if you want to give her the
It doesn't a problem. I mean, I have at the same time prepared some questions also, and I don't know if I respond what you say or I ask the question.
Why don't you respond?
I try to do the two things at the same time.
Why don't you respond now, and then we'll come back to you for a question later.
Yeah, okay. I think that there are between ones and the others, no? I think what probably we are quite agree with the diagnosis and also with the solutions. For me, the question is how we move from the neoliberal system to another model, more just sustainable, sustainable. And I think for me it's important to put the conflict in this inequal relation in this, sorry for my English, in this context of inequal power relationship. This is a struggle. I mean, if we talk and if we see what you do, more or less we are telling the same things, but the question is how to move, no? And in this movement or in this experience in Spain, the third sector is fundamental, because it's the sector that can, as Birch says, push the political agenda, no? Is what I wanted to say in my presentation, no? We need, but normally these movements, when they make action like occupy a empty build, telling that no more people without house and not more house with people. But when people do that, they are not supported by the state, but they are persecuted, criminalized, you know. And for me, and I'm going to go directly, no? The question is how we can force the institution to implement these policies that we are saying today, or as Birch said, how we can push, no, this institution. For me is the question, because the diagnosis and the solution, I think we are quite agreed, no? Sorry.
Thank you. Fernanda.
Thank you. It's about the funding system. In Portugal, the central government has the main responsibility for the funding for housing. But the third sector has having a big role on this along the last years, providing especially housing for the most vulnerable families, for the most vulnerable inhabitants. But the rate of housing that they are providing until now is a small rate. Nowadays, and in the sequence of the pandemic situation, we had, you know, that the European Commission and at European level, we have the resilience and the recovery program. And in Portugal, we have 10% of the funds affected to housing. And from this funding, also the third sector has candidated themselves, some of the structures of the third sector candidated to have funds to the refurbishment of existing housings they have, and they are old, they are not suitable to respond to the needs of the actual needs. For example, in terms of energy efficient thermal comfort and so on, and other aspects, and also to build new houses. But it is a small rate of all the housing needs. So we have the central state that has the responsibility to manage the funds. The central state also has housings, social housings for rent in the rental system, and the municipalities, the local governments also have these responsibilities. So we have two main levels: the central level, the municipality level, and also the third sector and the cooperative system. But the third sector and the cooperative system in a small role in Portugal. This is our, I don't know if Paulo wants to add something else about this, but I think it is.
I was just thinking of the role of associations, if I may, Bruce. Sorry, just very quickly, that the NGOs play a quite important role on assuming a role of mediators between municipalities and also with the private owners in some cases, and with residents. Just that.
Thank you, Eugenie. You've got your hand up, and then I'm hoping we'll move to another question. And
sorry, just as Maria Fernanda was mentioning, we have to bring things up to scale. So many of the NGOs don't have the technical capacity nor the finances to build at scale, which means we need to have partnerships between those who have those skills, build that capacity, and to scale it up. So it's more than just supporting the third sector. It's finding ways to develop scale in these issues.
Thank you. So why don't we turn to another question? I believe that Eva, you had a question you wanted to ask.
Perhaps I can add something to sum up this discussion on financing and the third sector, because I think that actually the financing architecture is a part of the problem and not a part of the solution. What we have seen recently, and we have seen it in the Portuguese example, the policies imposed by the international organizations like IMF, for example, do contribute rather to worsening of the housing situations than solving it, right? So there is something fundamentally wrong. And this something fundamentally wrong means that we are looking for a profit. And this means that we need growth. And what is growth? Growth is a demand on the future energy and future resources, including physical materials. And the problem is that we do not have them, right? It's a fantasy that we can grow and grow and grow and grow, because we are using already 1.75 this year renewable resources of the planet Earth. We cannot go this way. What does it mean? Any housing which is for profit will make situation worse rather than better. And here comes this again from history, the solution from history, right? If we look at the movements, progressive movements from the times before the Second World War in this part of the world, which is Europe, there were movements like housing associations or housing cooperatives with the clear aim of working non-profit, right? So everything they've got was to develop further housing as it was on the affordable prices or affordable rent, depends on the model, right? This means that we should be looking more for this kind of solutions, which means in turn that we need to incentivize them, right? At the moment, again, in this part of Europe, there are no incentives for development of this kind of housing. The only incentives are for banks lending for mortgages and for developers, right? Well, it won't solve the solution, because we heard from Mexico, we heard from Spain, we heard from Portugal that there is empty housing. Well, in Poland is exactly the same. If we build and financialize housing, we are looking for problems. If we are looking for them, we have them. That's the point, right? So we shouldn't be looking into solutions where actually the causes of the problems are located. That's my point in this intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you've really responded to my question with lots of valuable perspectives. Jeannie's got her hand up. I'm going to give her the last word on this question.
And there's Eva too. It's a question of who's going to build the housing. Is it going to be the state, or is it going to be the private sector, and how do you get it done? Where's the money? And if it's the state, where's the state going to get the money? It's going to get it from us. It's going to tax us. And so the question is, who's going to build that housing, and how do we get it done?
Thank you.
Well,
Eva,
actually, I do have an answer. We should stop transferring money to business, like bailing out banks, right? Or throwing away money for companies like Bank or others. And instead, put the money to public housing. There is an answer. Only the question is whether we have a political power to do this. That's the point.
Well, where do banks get money? They get the money from us. They get us from our deposits. And or they get it on the markets where we buy bonds or whatever, we being the general public. So the question is, how do you create a system that has units that can build the housing that we need?
Well, we do need to move on. Eva, can you take us to another question?
I think is great because I was just thinking in one sentence of this mobilization of these social movements that they say act instead of waiting for institutions, no, in in some way, no. I think we can continue waiting, no, and in this sense, I think I have one answer and two questions, okay. Just to show, no, this mobilization in Spain, social mobilization has led to the approval of the first housing law, but this law is incomplete and is not applied yet, no, and therefore we must continue to mobilize, no. My question in this sense is also for Izabela and Maria, is how can we force institutions to implement the policies that you propose, no? And the other is for Juan, is what has been the institutional policy regarding the self-production of space, no? If they are a process of legitimation or to these actors and this action, or in the opposite, there are persecution, a criminalization, etc. No? And in the other question is also for Juan is what have the institutions gentrification? No, I don't know if he can answer.
Eva, your last question came in and out for me, perhaps for others. Would you repeat the last question again? Oh, I think she's frozen. Well, we'll have to wait to find that out. But meanwhile, Izabela and Fernanda, do you want to respond to the first question?
I can.
How do we force institutions to implement the policies we've been discussing?
How to force institutions? The main problem is the government institution and the politics and the policies they are designing. And the changes here in Portugal, we since last years we had the socialist government. Now we have a social democrat government. And for example, in the previous government, we decided to restrict the license for the short-term rental systems. Now we want not to forbidden, but to limit this license. And this government came and dissolved dissolved this law, and nowadays they are free to open new short-term rentals dwellings. And this is a problem. The view of the government is essential, the policies, the strategy. And this is because if the government has this view and has a strategy well-defined with good objectives, they have the power, the government has the power to make the institutions work and do the things at the central level and at the local level. Without this strategy, without these goals, without this vision, nothing can be done, because the market, the profit is stronger than the social values and the social needs. The money is the strongest factor among these. So if we have a government that give sustainability, they give support, not sustainability, give support to these strategies, to the market strategies, nothing can be done in the other to get more affordable housing for rental and more public housing. And I'm sure that this is the answer to not only new house. I agree with you, Izabela. We don't have to build more and more and more. We don't have infinite resources. We have to refurbish. We have to reconvert what we have at this moment, and we have to give support and incentives to people to go to other places, to live with very good conditions, with a higher quality of life, to use what we have at this moment, because we have enough. Perhaps we have enough resources, but we aren't using it in the proper way. I think I answered your question.
Izabela, did you want to respond?
Yes, I would like to add two things, right? Look, every one of us said we have 12%, 14%, something vacant housing, right? Is there any policy that could discourage people having housing as a commodity? Yes, it is. You can tax it. You can tax it as the United States taxed during the Second World War the industry like Ford. The tax was higher in value than the value of the car until the Ford factory was producing tanks for the needs of the war. As far as I remember, it was 120% of tax on each car. So it was a clear incentive not to financialize. It would be a clear incentive not to financialize housing. And the second more important question is, would the government do this? My answer is no. And if you ask me why, there is this brilliant paper by Daniel Schmachtenberger who says, think how many, this is from Maria, right? How many times the government fulfilled the promise it gave you during the election time? Can't remember? Okay. And how many times government fulfilled the promises you never heard of given to the lobbyist and the business? Well, the system is flawed. That's my answer, right? And can we do something about this? The only way I see is more democracy, right? This is the only way of getting more power. How to do this? I don't know. I'm not very hopeful in this respect, but only through higher democracy. And by the way, I do not think representative democracy is a democracy, right? So the more power we can get to decide, the closer to the solution we could be. This is why I'm not very hopeful.
And Jeannie.
I'd like to put in a vote for hope, which is, I think it's really important that civil society be organized as one, not separate little groups pushing for different things, but to think about where their common interest is and organize and be strong associations. I would give the example of the women's groups that have been so very powerful in getting change in society, both in the global north and global south. I'm thinking in particular of Slum Dwellers International and the work they've done with recognition of informal settlements. I'm thinking of what the World Urban Campaign has with its various constituent groups representing different constituencies that have a common purpose, and to pull together those with a common purpose would be strength. And that would be how to operate within a democracy, that the strength of association, the strength of common views would be very, very powerful. I would point to the work that Amelia Says is doing with UCLG and bringing into the World Congresses civil society to speak with the mayors in that strong organization. Getting the mayors to realize that civil society is out there was a big deal. But at any rate, the point is civil society as a group can hold the politicians' feet to the fire if they are organized.
And Paulo.
Yes, I would like to to bring up a topic to the table, which is we started talking of affordability, but along this discussion, I've been listening more about financing, which is not necessarily the same thing. Financing can come from any parts, from national governments, local authorities, can come from banks, can come. Affordability might mean the fact that one household is able to afford to fulfill that fundamental right of having a home, not a house, provided by the state. And I think that, and I would like to hear your reflections on that. We saw already the numbers from Juan and also from Eba about the gap between wages and the housing prices. If we go to the global south that Eugenie underlines so well, I mean, and if we talk about informality and about slums and informal settlements, etc., the gaps between income and wages and what costs a proper home is even bigger than in the global north. So shouldn't we also see it more in this more, let's say, broader perspective and claim as planners to this, to this way of bringing the house more affordable for those who are going to use it? That would be my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. And Juan, looks like you want to respond.
It's on mute.
I think you are muted.
Sorry, now fine. Yes, also to respond the question by Eva, what's going on in Mexico and most Latin American countries, I would say, it's the need that pushes the family to self-develop their own homes, and that leads to informality that Paulo was talking about. That has been for years the response from the low income groups to affordability of the houses. They build themselves how to construct, but also they auto manage the construction of the house with the help of friends, or they can hire a contractor to do it on their own. As they get the money, they usually do the housing incrementally. That's what's going on in the informal sites. That's a possibility that's a discussion in many conferences here in the region, that we should try to push that or to help and promote that process that has been informal, to turn it into formal by providing finance, for instance. And I think that's something that can help the developing countries to strive on the housing issues. And also the economy of care in the Latin American countries. Know that support that you have from your extended family, from the grandparents, from the uncles that help taking care of the little kids, that has promoted a lot the construction of second or third stories informally, and that's somehow called a second wave of informality in Latin American cities. The first was mostly an occupation of land, and now the the former illegal or informal, I would say informal buildings are being built with second, third, or fourth stories, no? Sometimes without the supervision, and that can be, of course, a problem of the structure of the structural issues in the construction, and that's why it's very important to have a look to the materials that are being used, the way that the houses are being built. But when the family gets money, they are able to expand the construction of their house, and sometimes that is a possibility for them to have affordable housing because the land is out of the equation in the production of affordable housing. It's only the construction there because they already own the land, no? So that's sort of what's happening, and I don't know if I answered Eva's question and somehow what Paulo was talking about also.
Given the hour, I would like to suggest that we move into final interventions and ask each of you to take no more than 1 minute or so to share with us your last thoughts that you'd like everyone to hear before we conclude the session. And rather than call on someone arbitrarily, if there's a volunteer to go first, we'll take it from there. Eva.
Yeah. Just I want to share a case with Izabela. In Catalonia, taxes were paid for empty house, but to detect empty house, they do that with the bill of electricity and water. And what the developer done is hired people to open the taps and to turn the lights in these houses for that they can't recognize that they are empty house, no? It's just an example, no, of this struggle between what the state can do it and also what the market do, and the state do that because they are an organization that move and that push for that, no? And responding Paolo, and I think it could be a great close for my intervention, for housing to be affordable, the market must be regulated. And otherwise, price will only go up, no? But to regulate the market, we need states to act. And for that, and for that, we need an organized civil society that force institutions. This is my conclusion.
Thank you. Volunteer to go next? Or I'll start the call on folks. Jeannie.
Okay, housing is a global problem. Affordable housing is a global problem. It is context relevant. It takes local solutions, yet it calls on national and global adaptation of ways to allow the local governments to operate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Juan, would you go ahead?
Yes. Well, following on that, yes, affordable housing needs the intervention of a strong government with clear policies, because it's clearly also a market failure, and there's a lot that the planners can do by helping communities, by helping also or pushing forward to promote new policies on states at the different levels. So that's for me the important part.
Thank you. Fernanda, would you like to go next?
Yes, yes, thank you. I only can say that in spite we are having the same similar problems around the world, the solutions can be different according to the characteristics of the national and local characteristics, as we could see around this discussion. And I also think, and I am convicted that we need all the sectors to contribute to affordable housing for all. And we also need strong and clear policies and strategies at national level, and in our case at the European level, to achieve the goals that we have, that is to have a decent house for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Izabela.
Yeah, I'm the last one. So I think two things are needed, because as everybody agreed, the housing is very context sensitive. We should keep experimenting. All the small little experiments, like, I don't know, what Alejandro Aravena was doing in Iquique, right? Cheap framing housing, or on a European level, what Le Caton and Vassal were doing in Bordeaux while refurbishing the large-scale housing. So do the experiments, right, on a local scale. But on a wider scale, I wouldn't say global, because although it is on the global scale, but it's not top down, it is still bottom up. What can help is more democracy and more justice. And these are the tools which could help to solve the problem, right? That would be my answer to this question.
Thank you, Izabela. Paulo, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so I'd like to add something. I think that definitely communities have to be part of the solution as well. We've been focusing too much on housing problems, housing crisis, and we don't see communities as part of this solution. And how can they be part of the solution? If they hold some of the resources, they can be part of the solution. They can engage with planning, they can engage with planners. If they don't have any resources, they are not able to participate in the process, I believe. They'll remain in a much more passive context. That would be my takeaway from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. So we have these last 2 hours, I think we've really shown how housing is an issue that spans the urban development system, politically, economically, culturally, socially. Solutions to housing problems are going to take many new creative directions. And we've heard the wish to move beyond the borders of traditional housing policy to think about many other aspects of the urban system. We've heard the need to work globally, to change global frameworks and global institutions. We've heard about the need to pay attention to finance for local contexts when the financial system has so been oriented towards national contexts. And we've heard the need for paying attention to it, or to build a unitary voice for civil society. Many strategic directions that offer promise, I think, for making significant progress. I want to thank all of you for the time and energy that you put into today's work, and to those who are watching for their efforts to respond to housing issues in their own communities and countries. Many thanks to the Global Planning Education Association Network and to the World Urban Campaign for creating this envelope in which we have been working. Wishing all of you great success in the future with the housing work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas for all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It has been very stimulating and enriching. Thank you a lot.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Great.
We
Bye.
keep in contact.
Definitely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bruce, for excellent moderation.
Great.